Stories Philippines Podcast.
A chilling atmosphere descends upon this narrative, exploring history and themes that some listeners may find profoundly disturbing. The wounds discussed are real and lasting. Listener discretion is a vital necessity. Sometimes, the loudest screams are the ones no one hears. Imagine a newsroom at midnight, the amber glow of computer screens flickering across anxious faces, the soft halo of light tracing the furrowed brows and tired eyes of reporters still clinging to deadlines. Outside, rain drums against the glass in jagged rhythms, an insistent percussion that marks the passage of hours and washes the city in restless motion. Inside, a silence gathers. Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that suffocates, thickening the air until every breath feels measured and deliberate. There is a weight in the room, the kind that makes you wonder what truths are being swallowed by the darkness, what stories will never be told, what names will be scrawled out and left to rot in forgotten notebooks. Have you ever felt the chill that comes when someone enters the room but you see no one? Or heard the tapping of keys in an empty office long after the last editor has gone home? The faint staccato like an echo of a conversation that never happened? What if the ghosts we fear are not only the dead, but also the living voices forced into silence by hands unseen, by threats whispered over encrypted lines, by subpoenas that shred livelihoods, by slow, grinding censorship that wears people down until they stop speaking at all? Tonight, we step into a time when silence became a weapon, and the shadows in the halls of power grew teeth. Sharp, hungry, patient. We will walk corridors where laughter used to echo and find only careful footsteps. We will open filing cabinets and discover empty folders and erased names. We will listen for the stories that once roared and now are little more than a memory, waiting for someone brave enough to speak them back into light. I am Jessica, and you are listening to Stories Philippines Podcast. This is Season 5, Episode 8, The Silence of the Press. If you have your own story or know someone who does, please share it with us. Send your experiences to our email at storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. Our community grows stronger with every voice added, with every truth remembered and passed on to others. The year is 2006. The city never truly sleeps, but that particular night, Manila seemed to hold its breath. On February 24th, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo declared a state of emergency, Proclamation 1017, citing grave threats and the specter of rebellion. Soldiers took up positions at street corners and checkpoints. Protesters scattered as police moved in with force. Yet many would later say the real battle was fought not only on the streets, but inside newsrooms, at printing presses, and in the quiet, heavy hearts of those who carried the burden of telling the truth. The Daily Tribune, a fiercely independent newspaper known for its probing reporting, became a symbolic battleground. In the earliest hours of the crackdown, police entered the Tribune offices, seizing documents, monitoring phone calls, and casting a long shadow of fear over every story yet unwritten. Across the city, other newsrooms went quiet. Editors warned their staff to tread carefully, to watch their words, and to remember the cost of dissent. In a single night, the city's storytellers were transformed into the city's hunted. This, however, was not the first time silence had been enforced in the archipelago. Decades earlier, under martial law, a darker silence had fallen. Back then, radios played only the music sanctioned by the regime, and stories of missing journalists became whispered urban legends, told in hushed tones, never printed. History repeats itself, some observers remarked, but survivors of both eras insisted it was not mere repetition so much as a haunting, an echo of wounds that never fully healed. Filipino folklore is rich with tales of the silenced. In the provinces, elders speak of the mumu, restless spirits doomed to wander because their stories were never heard. In parts of Mindanao, the Aswang is feared not only for its appetite, but for its uncanny ability to blend in, to wear the faces of authority and deceive the living. In Luzon, legends tell of the Tiyanak, the cries of lost children echoing in the night, demanding justice and recognition. These creatures function as cultural metaphors for every truth buried by fear, every voice strangled by power. There is a long-held belief that when justice is denied, the dead linger among the living. They become multo, unable to cross into peace because something vital is missing. A name unsaid, a story untold. In times of unrest, people light candles at their doors and altars, hoping to guide these souls home. But what happens when the lost are not only the dead, but the living? Those exiled from their own names, their own words, those who find their voices stolen or erased. In the days after Proclamation 1017, the air in the Tribune office seemed to turn inexplicably cold, despite the humid heat outside. Reporters spoke of strange drafts and of typewriters clacking in the night when no one was there. One editor, who had stayed late to finish a piece on government overreach, later claimed she saw a figure at the edge of her vision, pale, faceless, with hands stained in ink. When she turned fully, it vanished, leaving only the smell of old paper and rain. A night desk journalist named Paulo shared his experience years later in a letter. He wrote, "There was a time that February when I felt watched, not by the police, but by something older. I would hear footsteps in the hall, soft and searching, like someone looking for a voice. Once, I found a sheet of newsprint on my desk, covered in type I didn't remember writing. The words blurred, then faded, and I felt a chill that sank into my bones." These are not isolated stories. A listener submitted account from a young reporter in 2006 described the lingering presence in a press room after a colleague was arrested. "We left a cup of coffee on his desk, untouched for weeks. Sometimes we'd smell it brewing even when the machine was off. Sometimes the screen would flicker, showing headlines that never made it to print." That cup, like the hollow chair and the extra microphone left leaning in a corner, became a quiet act of resistance, a way to hold space for what had been taken and to refuse the erasure of a voice. Across the Philippines, accounts collected from the web tie such hauntings to moments of political upheaval. Stories of spirit possession and restless presences commonly follow periods of unrest. Spirits are said to ride the living, overtaking bodies not to harm but to warn, to protest, or simply to be heard when conventional channels are shut. In older practice, the Babaylan, spiritual leaders and community healers, conducted rituals designed to free these voices and restore balance. Today, those rituals often take different, improvised forms. Vigils outside courthouses, candles burning in newsrooms that once smelled of fresh ink. Names read aloud at rallies until they become a chorus that cannot be ignored. The Haunting of the Press is not only supernatural in tone, it is a mirror of trauma and institutional memory. After events like the Tribune raid, journalists reported a cascade of symptoms that read like folklore. Nightmares of being chased down endless corridors, the recurring sensation of mouths going dry while the words to explain mattered most, waking at dawn with the sense that someone had been standing at the bedside whispering headlines. The steady, insistent fear, of surveillance, of sudden disappearance, of having your work erased, compresses into bodily sensation. In Filipino cultural parlance, such disturbances are often interpreted as signs that the truth itself demands to be told, that silence has become unbearable and must be articulated, by whatever means necessary. Those who survived or bore witness responded in hybrid ways, combining old cosmologies with contemporary protest. A newsroom might hang a photograph over a vacant desk. Colleagues would gather for an impromptu pajama vigil when a publisher's phone went unanswered. Editors kept a tape recorder running overnight. Sometimes these acts were practical, protecting archives and hard drives. Other times they were ritual, offering condolence to the absent. A common refrain among reporters was that they did not want to let the ordinary things go quiet. The hum of the press, the scrape of a chair, the stain of coffee on a blotter, because those sounds kept a story alive. The phenomena extend beyond the archipelago. In Latin America, the vanished journalists and activists are said to walk the earth in a different register. Names stenciled on walls, shoes left empty at plazas, radio frequencies where voices come back as echoes. In parts of Eastern Europe, tales of white ladies and spectral figures at newspaper windows warn against the political forgetting that enables abuse. The Philippines, with its complex history of resistance and repression, weaves these global motifs into its own tapestry of sorrow and defiance. Local customs, colonial histories, and modern technologies mingle, creating a layered folklore about memory and the cost of truth-telling. There is a part of Manila, not far from the old Tribune offices, where the city's past and its present rub shoulders. Streets lined with colonial facades bear the cracks of time and memory. Cement has been patched and repatched. Shop fronts house new businesses, but the air still carries the scent of paper and hot coffee. Locals say the area is haunted, not only by spirits of those taken during martial law, but by the echoes of typewriter keys, the static of radios tuned in the night, and the ghostly rhythm of presses long silenced. On some quiet nights, residents and passing delivery drivers alike swear they hear the distant churn of a printing press, the click of a shutter, or the murmur of a voice reciting headlines from decades past. The sensory landscape, damp paper, old coffee, the metallic tang of an iron press, becomes a mnemonic device, a way the place remembers long nights and stories that were never allowed to sleep. Individual stories multiply and persist on the web and in personal testimony. One listener recounted, "My aunt was a journalist. After she was taken, we kept hearing her favorite song on the radio at odd hours. The station would claim it wasn't on the playlist. Once, during a blackout, we heard her voice reading the news, clear as day, though the power was out. My mother lit a candle and whispered, 'Keep telling the truth, Anak, even from the other side.'" These small acts, singing a familiar tune, lighting a candle, leaving a coffee cup on a desk, function as secular prayer. They are ways to continue conversation with someone who has been silenced, and to insist that absence is not the same as forgetting. Communities also adapt physical forms of memorial and protest that echo ceremonial practices. Candlelit vigils are staged near shuttered presses. Public readings of lost columns and unsigned editorials are held in plazas. Archives are digitized and mirrored in far-flung servers to guard against seizure. In some cases, families and colleagues turn to music, theater, and street art to revive a voice. Murals depicting absent reporters, impromptu performances outside newsrooms, and podcasts that stitch together oral histories into a running testimony. These acts produce a living archive, one that refuses to be reduced to a footnote in state records. The sense that the dead, or the absent, are still present can be unsettling, but it also fosters solidarity. People who might not otherwise speak out gather for midnight remembrance. Younger journalists hear the names of the missing recited like an oral syllabus of professional ethics. Communities form networks to protect the living and honor the dead. The metaphors of haunting become organizing metaphors. If the past can return, then so can accountability. If a voice persists beyond enforced silence, it can be amplified, shared, and archived. There is also a careful ambivalence in how these stories circulate. Skeptics attribute flickering screens and phantom smells to stress, shared expectation, or simple coincidence. Psychologists point to the cognitive effects of prolonged fear, hypervigilance, collective memory errors, dream contagion, that can make a newsroom feel uncanny. Yet even where rational explanations are persuasive, they do not fully displace what people feel. The emotional truth that something essential has been stolen, that facts and faces vanish into gaps where history should be. The language of the supernatural helps communities frame those losses in a moral universe. The missing demand restitution. Silence is an injustice that seeks attention. Over time, certain ritual gestures become almost institutionalized. Journalists leaving for riskier assignments might borrow a pen from a colleague whose desk is a shrine. Newsrooms adopt minute-long silences before publication dates that mark anniversaries of raids or abductions. Such practices have pragmatically protective uses, keeping morale, signaling to authorities that the profession is watched. But they also perform a kind of cultural continuity. In those moments, the newsroom acknowledges itself as a living archive, a public trust that records and preserves a version of reality the powerful may want buried. These hauntings are not mere curiosities. They are active elements in a civic conversation about memory, justice, and the ethics of reporting. Ghost stories, candle vigils, and the steady circulation of names on the web participate in a wider struggle to define history. They remind communities and institutions that forgetting is a political act as much as remembering is an ethical obligation. The presence of the absent, whether described as spiritual or psychological, insists that stories have a momentum beyond the page, that a headline once written, a byline once signed, creates obligations that survive attempts at suppression. Whether you read these accounts as folklore, trauma narrative, political testimony, or something in between, their persistence matters. The smell of coffee left to cold on a journalist's desk, the occasional static-laced broadcast of a familiar voice, the mural that refuses to fade. These are ways communities keep each other accountable. They are ways to insist that truth, when pushed into silence, does not simply disappear. It changes form. It returns. And it keeps asking to be heard. The symbolism of the Aswang, an ever-present threat that hides among us, preying on the vulnerable, takes on a new and layered meaning in times of political fear and institutional erosion. The Aswang is not always a monster with claws or a grotesque shadow lurking at the edge of a rice field. Sometimes it is a law with ambiguous language, a decree issued at midnight, or a uniformed figure whose badge gives license to intimidation. Its hunger is for silence. Its power is in making people doubt their own memories and their own senses, in convincing communities that to remember is to risk everything. This is the kind of power that breeds real ghosts, not of flesh, but of forgotten narratives, of testimonies erased from public record and whole chapters of history folded away into private grief. In the weeks and months following Proclamation 1017, the crackdown intensified and the social fabric shifted. Protests were dispersed with increasing force. Journalists were detained and held incommunicado, and editors received thinly veiled warnings designed to instill paralysis. Yet stories persisted, Refusing to be completely extinguished, they slipped through the cracks in bureaucratic control. Threaded between state surveillance and self-censorship, underground newsletters appeared in cafes and community centers. Unsigned pamphlets circulated hand to hand. Anonymous blogs bloomed in digital corners beyond the reach of censors, and whispered stories traveled from taxi drivers to market vendors. The hunger for truth could not be fully satisfied by fear. Each act of suppression seemed to fertilize a new seed of resistance. The attempt to enforce silence only pushed the voices deeper into the culture, making them harder to find but impossible to destroy. One evening, in a cramped apartment above a Sari store, a group of reporters from various outlets gathered to share what they knew. Some worked for small community papers, others wrote for exile publications, while a few kept loose ties to mainstream newsrooms. Each brought a piece of the puzzle: a name, a persistent rumor, a copy of a confiscated document, a recording smuggled out on the thumb drive. They spoke in low voices, arranging facts like puzzle pieces on a kitchen table, as if afraid even the walls were listening. Later, one attendee would claim that, as they spoke, the lights flickered and the room grew suddenly icy. It was as if the spirits of every silenced journalist in the city had joined us, urging us to keep going. She said in a trembling voice. We left the meeting feeling watched but also protected, as if something unseen was on our side. Whether that sensation was paranoia, solidarity, or something older and more uncanny, it mattered. It strengthened their resolve and knitted them together in a fragile, courageous network. Throughout Philippine history, the power of story has always been a double-edged sword. Folklore teaches that those who control the narrative control the world. Proclamations shape what is remembered and what is condemned to oblivion, and official histories can sanitize or vilify entire communities. But stories, like spirits, have a way of breaking free, slipping between the fingers of those who would contain them. The Aswang may stalk the night, and the Mumu may whisper in the dark, but the sun always rises. Memory proves stubborn. Remembrance offers a kind of peace and resistance. Oral histories passed down by elders, songs sung at wake tables, and the stubborn recounting of small atrocities at family gatherings all resist the erasure that official power seeks. In the provinces, when someone is lost to violence or simply disappears under circumstances that the authorities will not explain, old rituals are revived and repurposed for contemporary grief. Families gather in homes, lighting candles and reciting prayers for the souls in purgatory, while also leaving spaces at the table for those who are gone. In some villages, children are told not to whistle at night, lest they attract wandering spirits. Elders warn that certain crossroads belong to the dead. During the crackdown, some journalists and their allies began leaving offerings: flowers, steaming cups of coffee, even old typewriter ribbons at the doors of their shuttered offices, hoping to appease whatever forces lingered there and to create a protective talisman against further loss. They were performing their own kind of modern ritual, blending respect for the unseen with the desperate, practical need to keep truth-telling alive and safe. These gestures were at once superstition and strategy, a way to honor the past while refusing to let fear dictate the future. Meanwhile, modern investigators tried to capture the presence of these restless spirits with methodical curiosity and a variety of technical tools. Paranormal teams, drawn by rumors and archival records, visited the Tribune offices and other sites linked to press suppression, systematically setting up recorders, infrared cameras, motion sensors, and night vision equipment to document any strange phenomena that might manifest. Some team members claim to have captured electronic voice phenomena, ghostly whispers entangled in the static, brief fragments of sentences that sounded like pleas for justice or shorthand notes from interrupted reports. Others reported sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature that seemed to move through rooms like cold breaths, equipment that malfunctioned without electrical explanation, and a persistent, unnerving feeling of being watched, a sensation that prickled the skin like the acute awareness of an unseen audience sitting across a desk. One well-known investigator, featured in a popular YouTube documentary, described the experience of entering the gutted site of a former newsroom and feeling an overwhelming, almost coercive urge to speak aloud, as if words were being pressed into her mind by an external force. I heard the phrase, "Tell them what happened," over and over, even though the room was empty, she recounted in the film. It felt like a warning, but also a plea, urgent and unfinished. Her testimony resonated with viewers because it echoed ancient spiritual notions of a voice seeking embodiment, the classic idea of a spirit attempting to find a living host to finally deliver a vital, long-suppressed message. Cultural belief systems and spiritual interpretations often converge in moments of crisis, providing frameworks through which communities understand loss and injustice. In Catholic tradition, for example, prayers for the dead, masses, rosaries, and special memorial rites are believed to help restless souls find rest and peace. Yet in this context, some priests, particularly those sympathetic to the cause of free press and critical of censorship, adapted liturgical practice into a form of public solidarity. They offered masses not only for the deceased themselves, but specifically for those whose voices have been taken. In homilies and private prayers, they would intone, "We pray not just for the souls of the dead, but for the truths they carried," framing spiritual intercession as a kind of moral witness. This blending of faith and protest became a subtle and poignant form of resistance, a way for communities to push back against the erasure of memory while invoking religious devotion as protection for truth-telling. Listener-submitted stories and local narratives often blur the line between the supernatural and the psychological stresses of a fearful era, creating folklore that circulates in social memory. One episode on the podcast Spookify told of a journalist who reported being haunted by static-laced voices on his vintage radio, voices that always returned at the stroke of midnight and seemed to recite garbled headlines. Another submission described a newsroom where computer screens would inexplicably flicker with unfinished headlines. Brief, half-formed lades that vanished when staff approached, only to return to normal after the team paused to pray together. Skeptics argue these accounts can be dismissed as stress-induced pareidolia, coincidence, or the power of suggestion. Nevertheless, in a culture where the dead are never truly gone and the past remains only a whisper away, such stories acquire a deeper symbolic charge. They suggest a social imagination in which untold stories accumulate a kind of spectral energy, haunting the present until someone listens, records, and finally tells what happened. As the weeks passed and the state of emergency at last lifted, the wounds nonetheless remained, raw and stubborn. Some journalists quietly left the profession altogether, unable to bear the constant weight of fear that had settled in their bones. Others, hardened and resolute by what they had survived, became even more determined, seeing their continued work and survival as a kind of small victory, a solemn promise to those who had been taken. The ghosts persisted in many forms. Sometimes they surfaced in dreams that woke you sweating. Sometimes they filled the heavy silence between broadcasts. Sometimes they appeared in the anxious faces of the next generation of reporters who would inherit this complicated legacy of fear and courage. In remembering these stories and the people behind them, we remember not just the darkness that stalked our streets and newsrooms, but the stubborn defiance that resisted it. The power of the Aswang, the silencing force, or whatever shape oppression takes, is undeniably great and frightening. Yet the power of the storyteller is greater in its own way. Each time a lost voice is recalled, Each time a headline is reprinted, each time a truth is retold out loud, the malignant spell is cracked a little more. We must never stop telling the story of the silence itself, because silence without context becomes an accomplice to forgetting. If you have ever felt the presence of someone watching over you and heard the still hours, if you have ever heard the faint echo of your voice that once spoke truth to power, or please share your story with us. ready/storiesphpodcast@gmail.com is always open, ready to welcome your memories, testimony, and reflections. You can find show notes and the many ways to support our work in the episode description. For listeners who want to explore further and gain access to extended interviews, behind-the-scenes material, and additional research, exclusive content is available on our Patreon page. Follow us on social media as well for daily folklore facts, archival snippets, and thoughtful context that help keep our collective history and memory alive. As you listen tonight, we invite you to consider this question: what becomes of a nation that forgets its storytellers, that lets memory and testimony fade into silence? What kinds of ghosts are created when truth itself is forced into hiding or dismissed as dangerous? And when the night grows quiet and you strain to hear anything at all, whose voices are you really listening for in that silence? Those who were silenced, or those who would prefer we forget? History shows us that the world has often tried to bury the inconvenient, to erase the difficult, and to silence the bold. Yet stories are stubborn things. They linger in unexpected places. They haunt the margins of memory, waiting patiently for someone to notice and retell them. They bide their time until a new listener comes along who is brave enough to listen and brave enough to speak. Every silence is a story waiting to be told. Every shadow hides a voice that will not rest, as one old proverb might remind us. Stay with us for more journeys into the unknown, for more careful listening and brave telling. Listen to past and future episodes to find the stories that remind us why we must always remember and why we must continue to speak. Do not forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast with others who care about truth and memory. If you are able, please support the podcast financially in the ways listed in the show notes. Your contributions make this work possible. Thank you for joining us this evening. Until next time, keep your candles burning a little brighter and keep your stories alive and ready to be told.